I have 2:00. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the April 23rd Region 2000 Services Authority meeting. We will start with public comment. We are going to limit public comment to a strict 3 minutes this time. Do we have any speakers signed up?
Do not.
Do not? Excellent. Next, we are on to meeting minutes.
I did sign up in the chat.
Who do we have signed up? All right, Mr. Hardy, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. This is John Hardy, 601 Callahan Road, Rustburg, Virginia. Can everyone hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make a comment about Region 2000 and the board's setting a new standard for governmental waste, fraud, and abuse in its last meeting, when a majority of the board members took action to move funds due to Campbell County into other areas of the Region 2000 budget to serve the purposes and benefit the other localities that did not bring space to the authority. So that was an improper action by an improper authority, a board that still does not meet the regulatory requirements of the state of Virginia. Perhaps we should expect no less, but I, for one, am appreciative of the fact that now we don't have to guess at where everyone stands. We know that Lynchburg, Appomattox, and Nelson all are looking out for themselves. And at least Campbell County does not have a 300-acre landfill in its future as a result. So thank you for showing your hand, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Do we have anyone else signed up that signed up electronically? Excellent. We will close public comment and we will move on to meeting minutes. We have minutes from January 29th, minutes from the March 12th special meeting.
Idea how long it takes to get around on smart. Main Street's clear.
We have a motion to take action on the meeting minutes.
I so move. Second.
Would you like to speak to your motion? Your second?
Yeah, I think Alex sent over and amended, there was a statement that I had made, so I asked for a correction. So you have the amended minutes, I think they were sent over this morning.
I think that's the reference to the $10 million. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just for the record, Campbell's received just under 8.4 million. I just want to be clear about that. That is a statement of fact as far as I know. It should not be misconstrued to mean Campbell was fully paid for the capacity that was brought to the authority. I think that's conservatively estimated at an $18 million asset. What's transpired is we took out a mortgage and the cost of eggs went up. We said, well, we've been paying this mortgage a while, so let's not pay the mortgage anymore. Let's pay for eggs. But Mrs. Adams did reference the $10 million. So I have no
I did.
to the minutes.
Yes.
Excellent. Let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Next, Alec and Clark, personnel retention and compensation study.
Yeah, thank you. We have Burns and McDonald here to present the finding from their compensation study and also a retention strategy to that includes incentives for our employees to remain a part of Region 2000. With the knowledge that we'll be closing the landfill in less than 4 years now. I'll turn it over to Brent Perdue, and he will present his study.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Pretty
Yeah.
well.
Great. And then can you see the presentation screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Very good. Yes, as Clark mentioned, Brent Perdue with Burns and McDonnell. And let me just get all this set up. Okay. The Region 2000 Services Authority engaged Burns and McDonnell to conduct a labor retention and compensation study. I'm a project manager here with the team, and we took a deep dive into the compensation and retention strategies, and I'm going to go over our findings here. First, I'll start with the compensation survey, and then we'll look at the retention analysis. And then lastly, we looked at privatization, what it would cost if in the event that the region wasn't able to retain sufficient employees, what it would cost to privatize the landfill services. We compared those costs, and then I will turn it over to Philip Kramer to look at the financial pro forma. Also, Allison Acarius is here with the team, and she'll provide support and backup information on the financial modeling. So in terms of the compensation survey, we looked out across the public sector and private sector entities. We selected the 6 authorities based on similar characteristics in terms of geography, size, and other factors. And then we looked at private sector entities where we assumed that most employees would be looking at transferring to, and these are typically construction companies where they have transferable skills around landfill equipment operation. This is the high-level summary of the compensation survey. Bottom line, looks like the authority is lagging in terms of compensation with their specific positions. We looked at position by position, compared job descriptions, looked for similarities so that we could compare apples to apples as much as possible. And we ended up using a weighted average to come up with the final result that we will use in the retention strategy. You can see the results there on the authority side of the screen. And then the private sector companies, we really just looked at the equipment operator category because that was the most similar across job titles. And you do see a difference there in the equipment operators from about 26% on the authority side and 16% on the private sector side. And that's typically due to construction companies will rely on overtime as a compensation strategy. And also there's different working conditions on a landfill face versus a construction site. And there's some skills differences in terms of landfill operators having to manipulate trash, which is a little more skilled versus just soil. So the results of the compensation study did show that the Region 2000 is lagging behind on the compensation. In terms of the labor retention analysis, our first step here was to interview employees. We interviewed each individual employee by themselves and got their feedback on what type of incentives it would take to have them stay with the authority, given that they have knowledge of the landfill closure in about 4 years. And you can see there's a pretty strong interest in most strategies. The monetary incentives and health insurance coverage, things of that nature, were coming in strong. There was a strong interest in transferring to a new position and having the benefits package for the retirement system transfer over. But that is a question that can be challenging in terms of whether or not they're able to get an actual agreement in place to transfer folks. So we typically left that out of the analysis for the most part, beyond touching on that was an interest that could be explored. So with the feedback from the staff and our knowledge of retention strategies, we looked at these different segments of what could be done. And to summarize them high level, we have a salary market adjustment based on that compensation study. We looked at annual bonuses. We looked at a sign-on bonus. We looked at covering the health insurance cost increase. Just gonna mute that person. And educational and training reimbursement, a sick payout incentive, and a final bonus package at the end of the landfill life. So on the right-hand side, you can see some of our assumptions there. To go over it briefly, the salary market adjustment is about a 30% increase in the current financial model. And then we developed a bonus structure that took a base bonus to incentivize employees to stay, and then had a performance incentive that encouraged employees to continue to do their jobs well, to not call out sick, to not have any performance disciplinary type situations. Just gonna mute that person too. Just gonna mute this person. And then we also included a sign-on bonus in case there was the need to go out and source new employees. And then we did hear from employees that if there are cost of living adjustments throughout the year, year over year, that typically the health insurance cost increase will eat away at that. So we included coverage of that cost increase. And then there is some smaller training and sick pay incentives. And then lastly, a final bonus package, which varied based on either 3 months if you were not needed for closure, to 6 months if you were needed to stay for closure for an additional 3 months. This is the key assumptions around the positions and employee counts that were used to factor out the total retention strategy. We also included a cost of living adjustment at 3% annually. This is a little further description of how we looked at bonuses. That top line is the base bonus, a percent of salary to be a baseline incentive for employees to retain employment. And then the performance base on the bottom line that would vary based on performance. So we took into account a number of factors here: total years of service, if they had a CDL license, if they have a landfill license or an engineering license, and then that performance disciplinary assessment. And then this was the 3 or 6 month variation on the final bonus calculation. So we worked with the team, with the region, on identifying how many people and what positions would be needed for what time period. And this is the summary of the total cost of potential retention strategies in the current financial model, broken out by fiscal year. On the top line is a salary market adjustment, and then the annual bonus, and then the final bonus package are the main drivers of the costs in this retention strategy, and it totals to about $3 million over the course of 4 years. And we will see that compared to privatization here momentarily. Summarizing the percentage of total cost. 1 million for market adjustment, about 1 million for bonus, about 700,000 for final bonus package. And then for privatization, we worked with a workforce staffing company who supplies labor for construction industry, so it's pretty analogous to landfill operations. They looked at the regional factors in Virginia and came up with a model to describe what it would cost to privatize. A lot of times in these situations, these are shorter term engagements for the employees, so they do typically get paid more. They have a bonus structure. They have a per diem, daily allowance for food and housing. They would have a mobilization cost to arrive on site. Oftentimes they are looking for a lot of overtime. However, in this situation, the Region 2000 doesn't typically run a lot of overtime, so that would not be an opportunity in this situation. And you need some operations employees to manage the operation, as well as at least one Region 2000 employee to manage the contractor. And then they also recommended a milestone bonus structure as well to incentivize the short-term workforce to stick around for a number of years. So extrapolating that out, this is the cost of privatization. It's about close to 13 million over the course of the 4 fiscal years. You can see that the costs will vary based on milestone payments for bonuses, and totals up to that annual cost there in the bottom line. So to summarize the cost comparison here, your current personnel cost is about $7 million. And with this retention strategy, as it currently stands, it's a $3 million number totaling 10 million as compared to about 12.5 million in privatization costs. So you can see that there is about $2.5 million additional in privatization costs. So maybe I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or reactions, unless folks want us to go directly into the financial pro forma. Oh, and then I did have one note here that fiscal year 25 and 29 are prorated based on the number of months left in 25, and then 6 months in 29, which is the projected number of months until landfill closure.
I have a question. In performing this study, did you also look at years of service? And are any of those employees eligible for retirement within this 4 to 5 year window?
We did look at years of service as a part of the bonus structure. And I'm not specifically aware of who is eligible or not for retirement, but we did not factor that into the analysis.
One of the concerns with the market adjustments that I have is I want to be able to do a comparison of what the equipment operators, for instance, would be making after the market adjustments as compared to what similar employees in the city, for my instance, in my instance, would be, just to make sure that we aren't on the salary side getting ahead or potentially far ahead of where my own employees, I imagine there'd be other similar concerns around the table, are. Can you provide that information so that we can do our own comparisons to our own workforces?
Yes, we have more detailed information on that in the report, and I was just looking to see if I had a backup slide on equipment operators specifically. Let's see
I think
here.
ultimately we'd like to see more than just equipment operators. That was more for as an example.
Yes, we can provide that information, and for example, and it doesn't necessarily compare your specific entity.
No, but we could do that work.
But yeah, and you could see here how we've displayed how the region stacks up compared to the other authorities that were chosen for the benchmarking study.
Table 4-3.
Sorry, was that a request to go somewhere specific?
I was just thinking the information that Greg just asked about might be in table 4-3 within the full report. Does that sound?
Yes, give me a moment.
At least 5 positions. Let's see.
So this is comparing the current authority salaries versus a privatization situation. And the privatized salary is what the employee would receive, and the bill rate here is what would be charged to the authority. Basically that markup for the labor workforce staffing company to source and manage these employees.
It
So I
does
think,
show the average Region 2000 salary by position in that table.
yes.
But in particular, it would be the average salary after the proposed adjustment. That, is that in the full report?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Allison to chime in here. She may be able to navigate us specifically to that information. We have it in the model, and I just need to know if we have it specifically displayed in the report.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So it is discussed in the report. If you go into the appendix, I believe it's, let me see which appendix it is, but we have the year over year adjusted salaries.
Allison, do you want to share your screen? I think I have the draft version.
Sure, no problem. 1 second. Let me pull it up as well.
Yeah, I can't see.
And
I hear her mouse is scrolling, so bear with us as we
Yeah, sorry. just
locate the specific
pulling up,
information.
And I don't know that there's anything that I could do with it here at the table. I guess it's more,
Sure.
is the information there, and can you make sure you get it to us for us to be able to use it prior to
Yes.
the next meeting, in a way that we can read and understand it fully?
Yes, so I'm sharing my screen here. So this is in
That's
the
the problem.
appendices, and yeah, I understand it's a bit small, but we have it all laid out here by position, and so you can see it kind of summarized the findings of the compensations survey. And then on this page here, we have scenario 1 where that market adjustment would be made in year 1. And then those annual 3% cost of living adjustments in each year. Whereas scenario 2 is that unadjusted, just annual 3% increase year over year.
And in the study, do all equipment operators, let's say, regardless of tenure, end up moving to the same point?
No, everybody's salary would just increase based on that 29.18 weighted average.
Made no sense in my head.
Slide
And
she's
in
page 128 in your packet.
So yeah, wherever their current salary is at, it would be adjusted by that proposed market adjustment, and depending on where their starting point is, like if I know the numbers are really small, but it looks like there's a new employee who is at $45,000 a year, or that's a scale attendant, $48,000 a year equipment operator versus there's a 67,000 who is probably much more tenured or has a CDL and landfill operator license. I don't know the specific reasons there, but those in general would be the reasons.
in our analysis, we really tried to promote both equity, but also some more incentive for those with more years of service and higher performance. And so this is how we've kind of tried to balance both of those.
Any other questions on the salary study?
I think probably the ones I have would be an internal discussion that we can have.
I would like to say that since January, when Emil County did not approve the expansion, that next week I had one skilled equipment operator turn in his notice, and he left for that reason. And then about 2 weeks later, our environmental field technician turned in his notice. So we've already lost 2 employees since January. So I think it's real important that we strongly consider approving this in some form. Or we're going to have a crisis on our hands that none of us want to be a part of.
When would staff expect or like action on this particular subject?
Well, we were hoping that we would, at a minimum, get some kind of an incremental, increases in this. And our recommendation was to move forward, immediately with a compensation, the compensation plan increases. And then if the board, would like to discuss, the retention plan, the retention strategies, we could implement those, at the next meeting or continue the discussion of those the next meeting. But, our employees have been dealing with this uncertainty for about a year now, when we were all weren't sure what we were going to be doing. And then we were asked to present a proposal to expand. So they've been waiting, anxiously waiting on that decision, and that decision came out. So now they're very concerned about their futures, their family, and their employment. So again, I think it's critical that we take some action.
Mr. Chair, would we circle back to this after they go through the pro formas? I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but sounds like we need to talk about this more.
I think that works. We can get through with all the consultant reports.
Yeah, and if I may, I think one other interesting result and key finding of the report was that the prioritization study showed that, there would be, additional costs incurred if that was needed, if additional employees leave the authority. So with that, pending any
Can
other
I
questions?
ask one
Sure.
last question? So what we see here, if you go to, I guess, slide 5, right? Or page 51 in our packet, the percentage difference when we did the aggregate average salary comparisons, were all over the board when it came to the different positions. Some being out of market as much as 65%, some being, -1, right? So is there a reason other than just simplicity that we used an overall aggregate across all positions rather than taking a look at each individual position, each position classification separately?
Yeah, the last time we did a compensation study, which was over 10 years? Yeah, about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. And that's the approach we took, individuals adjustments. And actually that ended up causing more harm to the organization than it did good. So we believe, and we know from experience, that using an average increase is more fair and equitable to all the employees versus looking at them individually. I was here when we did that last one, and it caused a lot of internal strife.
So was that a recommendation presented to the firm that's doing the study, or is this their unbiased opinion of how we should do this? I mean, how are you led to?
I'd say it's the latter. I mean, one of the things that we looked at here was, for example, the office manager. We felt like there was a more fairer approach to use a weighted average versus, looking at individual employees such as the office manager and, doubling plus their specific salary. So, in a lot of cases too, the landfill equipment operators in particular are of concern in terms of, retention. So we felt like prioritizing their wages and salary over, scale house attendant, office manager was more important than looking at the individual line items.
I guess my question alludes to the fact you said earlier that you looked at certifications and training and education, and that impacted what your proposal.
to distinguish there a little bit, the market compensation did not look at years of service. It basically looked at job descriptions and tried to compare apples to apples job descriptions in similar types of operations and authorities. And then on the bonus structure, we did look at years of service on the bonus structure. So they're kind of separate tracks of potential retention strategies, or even just compensation's one lane and then retention strategies is another lane, and they could overlap if you choose, or they could be separate.
And did you use, from the organizations that we used as comparisons, did you use actual salaries for the people in those jobs and with specific job descriptions, or did you use a published job or a pay range? Or, I mean, was this actual salary data?
Yeah, Allison, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. So the salaries that were used in the survey were actual salaries. They were not posted on job boards, but we did use the average salary for each of these positions, and it's not been weighted by the number of positions. So, for example, if one of the authorities had 4 equipment operators versus the authority's 6 or 7 equipment operators, there's no difference in that weighted average.
Any other questions on salary study for the consultants? All right.
So I know we wanted to look at the pro forma as well, right? How that impacts the rates. I'll turn that over to Philip to discuss that. You're muted, Philip, if you're speaking.
Sorry. Yeah, just getting the slides pulled up here. I've sent a request to be able to share my screen or okay. All right, so I'll just share this one brief slide here that communicates the strategy that we took to design the rates once we received the results of the compensation study from Brent and Allison. So based on the last meeting, we assumed that 100% of reserved and future excess revenue will be allocated to the closure post-closure fund. And then we solved for the rates so that heading into closure in January of 2029, the authority would retain a 3-month operating reserve. And so I'll walk through that graphic you see on the top of the slide in just a second here, but I want to highlight that policy decision that I have on the bottom bullet there first. So here we ask, what is the optimal ending operating fund balance in fiscal year 2029 to effectively balance risk mitigation and financial stewardship? So essentially what we're asking there is, how much money would the authority like to retain in the operating fund going into closure, knowing that the full balance of that closure post-closure fund has been funded by the contribution of excess revenue, and then also transfers made in the annual budgeting process historically. So I'm going to walk through the 3 scenarios now. So on the leftmost side, you see the baseline, and the difference in what you're seeing here in the member rate and what was presented at the last meeting is that we did take the approach so that, as you'll see, the dark blue line, and for those that may not be able to see it, it is the top line in that graphic, is that is the estimated 3-month operating reserve requirement. So that includes salaries, operating costs, equipment replacement, et cetera. And then the bottom blue line is the estimated ending fund balance based on the net revenue calculated from the current rate and projected expenses. So this scenario has no sort of cost impact related to retention or privatization. So you'll see that the estimated operating reserve requirement for 25 through 28 is around $1 million. And then in that year of closure, it would be reducing to about $550,000, and you would retain a balance of $550,000 going into closure. And the reason that you may do that is to mitigate the risk of unforeseen equipment failures or environmental concerns, et cetera. The second strategy, or the second graph in the middle there, presents the retention strategy. So with the addition of those costs, you'll see that the estimated operating reserve balance increases to about $1.25 million in 2026, where we've incorporated those costs. And I will go through the pro forma in a second to walk through those costs. But as you head into that year of closure, you would have been building up a fund balance so that in that final year, you can draw down on that fund balance to fully fund any sort of retention strategies or end of life bonus payouts. And this graphic is why we've asked that policy decision, because when we include all of those expenses that Brent and Allison walked through, it does increase that estimate of where the operating reserve requirement needs to be. And so we wanted to talk to you all to determine if $1 million going into the closure, when you've fully funded closure, post-closure costs, and the salaries that are associated with that, is that $1 million balance necessary? So that's the reason that we're bringing this to your attention. And the rate that is assumed here is $34.44 for the member communities across the fiscal year 26 through 2029 period. And again, that assumes that all the strategies that Brent and Allison walked through are incorporated. That final slide there presents the privatization, where that rate is $38.28 for the member cities. So again, you can see that significant increase in cost that's related to privatization. And for this scenario, then again, in that final year, you have the bonus payouts and increased costs related to the privatization. So in that final year, you'd be drawing down the fund balance to about $800,000. So let me walk through now on a more detailed basis the actual pro forma scenarios. So what you see here on this first slide is the baseline, and you'll see that the member rate is that 29.31 across the period of fiscal year 26 through 2029. This scenario assumes no increases to personnel or expenses related to retention or privatization. And what we've done since the previous meeting is also make some reductions in the amounts that of the equipment replacement. We've moved up some of the purchases, so that impacts the purchasing price. And with this scenario, as you'll see, as I scroll down to the bottom in the rows 58 through 61, you can see those calculations of the ending operating reserve balance, where you would maintain that $570,000 going into closure, post-closure. The second scenario here is where we present the retention strategies. And again, you'll see 3440, and in line 17 is where we've incorporated the retention strategies that were presented. And these are the market salary adjustment is incorporated in this. So you'll just see that the personnel expense generally remains constant in row 16. That salary adjustment is incorporated in row 17. And again, highlighting the rows 59 through 62 here, what you'll see is that growing fund balance, because the way we've calculated this is to meet the financial policy, which we're asking if it needs to be modified for that final year of the landfill life, so that you would then draw down for the estimated cost of $1.3 million for the retention strategies. The final scenario here is the privatization. And just to communicate the workings of this model, as you'll see in row 16, what we've done is we've prorated the projected cost of personnel for fiscal year 2025 for 10 months of work at the current salary level. And then what we show in line 17 is the privatization. And we understand that operations are currently proceeding with existing staff at the authority, but we've presented this way to present an apples to apples comparison so that if you implemented the cost of the retention strategies at this time and compared it to implementing the privatization strategies at this time, here is what the financial impact would be. So we obviously know that this is more of a hypothetical, but wanted to give you that background. And so then all of the privatization costs are carried in row 17 beginning in fiscal year 26, and we've eliminated the services authority personnel expense in row 16. And for the privatization assumption, that strictly refers to the personnel expenses. It still assumes that the authority would retain the responsibility and financial burden of the O&M costs and also the equipment costs of the landfill. So that's why you see no change in rows 18 through 19. And again, just highlighting rows 59 through 62, where we've solved for the required rate, for the required member rate based on the estimated operating reserve balance in fiscal year 2029. So as you can see, there's a pretty clear need for a policy discussion and decision from you all about, where do you want that fund balance to be ending in 2029? And the discussion is, should that be zero because the fund balance for closure post-closure is already assumed to be fully funded, or do you still retain some sort of balance, which is up for discussion by the board based on any unforeseen circumstances that will require, the drawdown on that fund balance in that year. So I'll pause there and open it up to questions and discussion from you all.
Any questions?
Would it be prudent to have some sort of fund balance after closure, given everything's funded? I think staff could probably speak to that. What are your thoughts? Or
Yeah, I would maintain, at least for, a couple of years, some type of a fund balance. To get us through closure, capping the landfill and entering into the post-closure period. And then at that point, we could determine whether or not we can, what to do with that fund balance.
I think I know the answer to this question, but does the pro forma make any assumption for the potential disposition of we've fondly come to know as the Bennett property?
No. Other than paying back the loan we took from our closure fund to pay for the Bennett property. But no, it does not include selling or leasing or doing anything with the Bennett property.
And am I wrong in thinking that if whatever level of fund balance we might want to have would sort of inform our tipping fees. That would influence the balance that's left. Right?
Presuming tip fees fund closure and post-closure.
John's there.
Thoughts? Want to continue on with who's going to walk us through the budget summary?
I think that's. Do we have any more questions for Burns McDonald?
I don't at this time.
Should we keep them on in case we want to circle back to something? If they're available to do so.
Just stay on.
If you don't mind, stay on for a little longer.
Sure.
If you can.
Sure, no worries. I'll be here. I'm just gonna turn off my video.
For the FY 26 proposed budget, I've got a summary in your packet. We're increasing our tonnage projections by 0.5%. Member tonnage increase to 71,265 tons, and a market rate tonnage increase to 125,038 tons. Both of those are 0.5% increase over this year. Revenue based on that is $8,207,358. That's almost a 15% increase in revenue. And the expenses matched revenue at $8,207,358. Which again is about a 16% increase over FY 25. On Schedule 3, you'll see a 3% salary increase proposed for July 1st. This is subject to change based on the employee retention and compensation study that was just presented. However, the tipping fee that we propose based on the proposed budget that's attached is a member rate of $35.44 a ton, and the market rate is a $10 differential at $45.44 a ton. Now that member rate does include a separate line item that includes the total annual cost of the fully implemented compensation study and retention strategies. So that's baked into that $35.44.
Unless I misunderstood, I thought the 3440 and 4440 that were presented by Burns McDonald already baked everything in. So why is there a difference there?
Well, the pro forma is a 20,000 foot view of our budget. And when you get down into the weeds, the proposed budget that we're presenting is the actual numbers. We do reconcile our pro forma and actual budget, but those numbers do bounce back a little bit, bounce back and forth a little bit. So when we took the number from the retention strategies and the compensation total for next fiscal year, which is shown on Schedule 3 for next fiscal year, that total cost will be $467,000 and $995. So that was pulled out of the Burns McDonald retention study and plugged into our actual budget. So those numbers you bounce back and forth a little bit, but we do try to and over since we formed the authority, that's been the case with the pro forma and the member rate, and which has actually been a very good, accurate model of our tipping fees over the course of the life of this authority. I just included my note about not increasing the member or market rate tipping fee for 8 budget years, and we've only had one tipping fee increase in the past 11 years. And I think that also, not only has that kept our post-closure fund from being fully funded, it's also one of the reasons why we've fallen behind on our compensation over the past 8 or 10 years. So we are proposing a member rate of $35.44 a ton and a market rate of $45.44 a ton. And just to be clear, that number does include the recommendations from the Burns and McDonnell compensation and retention study.
Clark, if you don't mind, I'll jump in as well with the discussion on the differences between the authority's budget and the pro forma. As you'll see in line 2 of the retention strategy pro forma, the cost of service rate is at 35.60, so very similar to what Clark has presented. What we've done is taken a strategy where you have the same rate across the 4 years. So when you look at the actual cost of the budget distributed by the tonnage projection, you're going to align yourself with the $35 rate that Clark and the pro forma has presented. And so the difference between what you're seeing in the pro forma is that we've then looked at how do we normalize it across the 4 years. And that's where we arrived at that 34.40 member rate calculation.
Any more questions on the proposed budget?
Clark or Alec, can you walk us through what are the steps that we need to take in order to properly notice and vote and adopt a budget?
Yeah, I'll let Alec explain.
So we have a draft budget in front of you today with the tipping fee recommendation of $35.44. So on the advice of council, we followed this last year. So our next step is to adopt a resolution that would put the public on notice of and of course the haulers on notice of the tipping fee that we would consider. So there was a resolution, a draft resolution in your packet that includes that dollar figure, $35.44, member rate, market rate, $45.44. The adoption of this resolution compels staff then to advertise this rate for a public hearing. The public hearing will be at your regular June meeting. And at that time, you would have the option to then increase tipping fees, presume that the fiscal year, July 1 of 2025, at any rate up to that amount. So that would be the maximum that you would do. So once the public hearing is concluded, we would then have the opportunity to adopt a budget pursuant to that public hearing. And you would have the opportunity, of course, in June to decide to what extent up to 100% that you would fund the compensation or retention study with addition to, in which case that would affect the budget also. So if you would like to revisit in greater detail the compensation retention study, we could have a special meeting in May, fourth Wednesday of May was our fourth Wednesday has been our custom. So that is the desire. We can continue to workshop that piece of it. But our budget would be appropriate to be adopted at the fourth Wednesday of June so that we're ready to go on July 1st.
I do notice that the proposed budget for FY25 is showing the $933,120 split to Campbell.
That's based on our current financial policies.
Is that for the entire year, FY25?
You're looking at the budget that what we have there is you're looking at what was initially approved and contrasting to what's being proposed now. So it's just a comparison's sake. We do not show proposed for the FY 26 budget to reserve 925 again.
I thought we withdrew that financial policy.
He did. And so in the financial report that's provided for the to-date expenditures, we removed that piece of it and showed the FY 25 amended budget.
What it does show is the FY 25 budget anticipated conforming to our old policies and paying Campbell.
Like, I know your guys are in a hurry to have some clarity on the compensation analysis and the path forward from the board. Speaking for myself, only here, I'm a lot more comfortable with the retention bonus portion of the plan than the market rate adjustments, simply because and I understand the concept around treating everyone similarly, but you know, treating everyone similarly seems to create instances where we're not aligning positions with the market. And I am concerned about recommending a level of base pay, especially for equipment operators, that might not align with what we're paying similar positions in the city. So I would definitely like some time to go and revisit that. I would be open to a special meeting in May where we can have a longer conversation about this, especially after having my HR and budget folks take a look and doing comparisons to city staff. I'd be interested in anyone's thoughts.
I think a work session would be
That would
good.
be good.
It's too much to go over and look at all the detail at a regular meeting, in my opinion.
I would like to say one thing about comparisons we used in the compensation study. We focused on landfill authorities for the most part. You do see Augusta Water in there. They run the Augusta County landfill too. So we pulled out their data for the landfill. But our closest neighbors and our closest operation in scope and size and scale is New River Resource Authority in Pulaski and Roanoke Valley Resource Authority in Roanoke. We're all very similar operations, with the exception Roanoke does have a transfer station operation. But if you just pull out those numbers and look at the difference of the compensation from their employees and our employees, you're looking at 30-40% difference that they're paying their employees more than we've been paying our employees. We kept some of those other authorities in just to try to get a more even and balanced approach to it. But in reality, Roanoke Valley Resource Authority and New River Valley Resources Authority are the two closest operations to our authority. We're one of the 3 or 4 largest public authorities in Virginia. You've got SIPSA, which is by far the biggest. They're in there. You can look at their numbers. Roanoke is next. We come in third, and New River actually comes in around 4th as far as tonnage is concerned. Of authorities operating landfill facilities.
Would be the closest authority east of here.
There's an authority in Richmond, but they don't have a landfill. There's Henrico County. That's not an authority. I think there's a small authority in Southside. I can't remember the name of that authority. And then you've got ZIPSA.
I have questions, but probably would be appropriate to wait until our May meeting. Some things that I'm curious about. Do you do annual performance evaluations, or would you say that 100% of your employees align with performing at 100% that you would recommend? Or
Yeah, at this point, yes. And that is one reason we included a performance-based matrix for awarding the second part of the bonuses is to, be able to just incentivize the employees to continue to, doing their job. We're not asking anybody to be a rock star or whatnot, but, we did put that in there so that we could have, that we could evaluate the employee when the bonuses are due and make sure that they've been performing up to the level of their job descriptions.
And do you have a history of performing thorough and consistent performance evaluations for employees? And I ask that because it's all well and good to do performance evaluations. When you do performance evaluations that ultimately impact pay, the scrutiny that is placed on that process and the potential liability that exists as a result around it kind of increases dramatically. And if we are not, if we have a process that isn't locked in and consistent, it may be more trouble than it's worth. So I don't know that we need an answer now, but I would consider that strongly as we think about the performance-based part of the bonus structure.
Okay. I would just offer this. You need bodies. A lot of discussion about performance. Lucky to have the bodies we've got. If one of them leaves, you're not going to hire with a 4-year horizon an exceptional performer. So we need a strategy that's about keeping people. So to convolute it with a lot of weight on performance, quite frankly, complicates the math. It's a retention strategy. It's not a quality assurance guarantee. And I think Clark has already mentioned that we're losing people. And that, to your point, Mr. Chairman, isn't even competing with us. If they make more than us, that may be what's necessary to keep them out there doing the work, recognizing that their job ends in 4 years. So I'm sort of getting my mind around how useful that comparison will be to us. But I will, having said that, say, and I see we've got some employees called in, fully support a full vetting of retention strategies and compensation adjustments, 100% behind it. I simply won't support this, right? The arithmetic is based on the withholding of funds to Campbell. If we were doing this with a genuine assessment of the tip fees so that we're all paying it as we should have been and should be. But until we're doing that, I'm not going to support a rate that sort of leans on places the burden on Campbell County. So I think the conversation is worthwhile. I encourage you three to have it. But at this rate structure, it's banked on Campbell's money. Campbell's money.
All right. So I think
Well, and I do think performance does count, and more so than just bodies. Because you have committed workforce with performance.
I wouldn't discount it. I'm just a lot of emphasis on a rigorous performance evaluation process. What are you going to do with the C- employee? You need them.
You know, we haven't talked about Region 2000 involvement either post-closure. We've got an office manager and a finance person, but you have staff here that's been performing some of those duties. So how does that fit into this equation as well? What's that model going to look like? You know, so I think we just can't make just a decision and then say, go with it. I think there's some thought process, and that's why we're asking. We're not taking anything away from the bodies that you have, but we've got to protect the organization as well.
Anyone else have anything they would add?
Only a final comment, if we're gonna reconvene in May, there's only so deep you can form this in open session. So I encourage staff and the chairman to be in conversation, how granular we get on this, spread into some uncomfortable waters if we get too specific, and the organization is not big enough to obfuscate that for very long. So encourage everybody to get your questions to staff so we can have an earnest understanding of are we doing this open session or closed.
Mr. Hefty, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I do think Frank brings up a good point here. And I think before we have our next meeting, a good understanding of what portions of this conversation are appropriate for an executive session and what would be appropriate for an open session would be important.
I talked to Alec about that before this meeting, and Freedom of Information Act says that you can talk in closed session about the salaries of specific employees. And so if the conversation gets to the salaries of specific employees, you can definitely go into closed session to talk about those. If you're talking about for instance, across the board 30%, or a bonus that's given to everybody, that's about everybody and not specific employees. So, it's difficult in a small organization because it's sort of a combination of the two. But we do need to be careful about discussions of specific employee salaries, which are okay in closed session, and general salary increases, which are not.
So Bill, it looks like out of our 17 employees, most of them, half of them are in unique job titles. And the only class of employees that has any sort of volume are the equipment operators. So if we got anywhere beyond doing a consistent a general increase percentage for anyone, we would in essence be talking about individual employees. Is that, do I have that?
Yep, that's right. That's right. And so you could go into closed session to talk about specific salary increases for those individual employees by position, but not if you're doing a across the board salary increase for a class of people, which would be the heavy equipment operators.
Okay. So I think a special meeting in May to discuss compensation in more detail, where we're very careful about how we're having the conversation. Then we need a public notice with the appropriate lead time ahead of our next regularly scheduled meeting, correct? That would be when we would adopt budget ultimately. So when's the next regularly scheduled meeting?
June 25th.
June 25th. We need, what's the,
Public notices need to be issued 14 days and then 7 days ahead of the meeting.
and the public notice would need to include essentially an up to
It's a
tip fee. And would you recommend that the number we used in that up to tip fee be the number that is in the proposed budget now?
Yes, sir.
The 35? Does that make sense to?
I think we have a resolution I think we're supposed to act on that affects that, right?
Right.
Thank you, Susan. Or Candy, whichever one. of
You're
you-
welcome.
Whichever one. You do need to vote on the resolution.
At the special meeting, could we also discuss what level of ending operating reserve balance that we're all comfortable with? Ahead of voting on the rates and things.
Did you guys bring a recommendation?
So are you ready for motion?
I think so, for the resolution, setting forth the preliminary FY 2026 solid waste disposal fees. Do I have a,
I move we adopt the resolutions with the proposed budget and setting the public hearing for
2 p.m.
2 p.m. on Wednesday, June the 25th, 2025.
second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Discussion.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, the rates proposed are artificially low. Based on the transfer of funds due to Lynchburg and Campbell into the post-closure account. So I'll be objecting to the resolution, but I do encourage the authority to raise rates sufficient to pay the cost of service, to implement a retention strategy, and to pay Lynchburg and Campbell.
Any other comment? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
All right, organizational reports, Clark?
Okay,
Right.
Is it okay to excuse the folks from Burns McDonald? I know they had other things to get to.
So Philip and Allison and Brent, we really do appreciate you hopping on. I will follow up with you shortly after this meeting about next steps. But thank you for your time and efforts on this.
Thank you.
Thanks for y'all's time too. Bye.
thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, organizational reports. We have completed our annual capacity report. The DEQ requires us to submit each year. And we have confirmed that we are still looking at a January 2029 is when we reach our full capacity, permitted capacity. We did a new survey of the entire permitted area and recalculated our capacities, and that did confirm that we are looking at January 2029. We did find some areas that have settled significantly over the landfill, and I'll be looking at a report probably at our next regular meeting that has some strategies where we might be able to squeeze a few more months out of it, but there is cost involved with doing that. But right now, we're still using January 2029 as our closure date.
Mr. Chairman.
So that's our max out, right?
Yes.
Isn't there a tapering that will happen in terms of waste that can be received, or will you continue to just take the current volume right up until the last day?
Yeah, we'll take as much as we can, and I'm gonna get to a little bit of that here in a minute. That discussion is just with actually the next topic.
Thank you.
Solid waste management planning, and I'll get to Frank's question here in just a second, which is definitely a legitimate concern. Every locality in Virginia is required to submit a solid waste management plan. Now, we have a joint plan with the members that are in the authority. You can do it by yourself. a county or city can submit their own solid waste management plan. Or sometimes two counties that aren't even part of authority might get together and submit a joint solid waste management plan. But you have to update that plan every 5 years. This is our 5th year, so we're updating ours right now. And we will be describing the capacity issues that we have and the beginning of our closure process in our solid waste management plan. Saying that, each of your localities will have to create your own solid waste management plan. And that has implications on opening up a transfer station. A question was asked recently about what steps do we need to take to open up a transfer station. The DEQ has process called permit by rule. You don't even apply for the operation of the transfer station until it's constructed, finished, certified by an engineer, and ready to operate. But the DEQ has a checklist of things that have to be considered along the way to approve that permit. And the very beginning of the permit is you have to have your own approved solid waste management plan. So it's important that you begin having discussions with your staff about developing your own solid waste management plans. Then there are also some other requirements that the DEQ has as far as public participation in siting a transfer station. So I will, and I have the permit by rule application that I will distribute to each one of you, so you can look at it and make sure that you're checking all the boxes as you move forward with whatever means of solid waste disposal that you elect to implement over the next 4 years. And saying that, we are looking at a January 2029 date of closing our gates. And as Frank was mentioning earlier, what happens is as we approach that date, the landfill gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So the room to operate up top gets tighter and tighter and tighter. So we may be looking at staggering our customers the last few months. We may be trying to look at areas for diverting some of the waste the last few months. Or we may have to look at different operating hours to accommodate, because what that also means is fill face delays, getting the trucks in and out of that smaller space. So I would strongly recommend that each of you have something in place 12 months to a year before we close our gates. My planning process for opening up a new cell at the landfill has always been minimum 6 months. Have the cell constructed, permitted, and the certificate of operation from the DEQ, a minimum of 6 months before we even need to go into it. That gives you a lot of flexibility so that you don't get caught with not having a permitted space to put your waste. So I would strongly recommend that you begin number one, the process of solid waste management planning, and also the planning for whatever solid waste disposal method that you ultimately decide to implement.
So Clark, may I, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I guess I'm wondering how these provisions can be implemented into the authority's plan that you are preparing now. Why would it have to be individualized? Why couldn't it be encompassed? Because I know when the transfer station was permitted in Appomattox,
We had to include that.
you put it as a minor revision to the plan.
And that is an option. We could continue to have the Region 2000 Services Authority be the planning waste unit for the next 30 years. But that'll be an individual board decision on whether or not you want to continue doing that. And then we would add your individual solid waste management methods into that plan. But it was, that decision we'll need to make that pretty soon because we're updating our plan right now. And I have had a discussion with the DEQ folks who approve these solid waste management plans. And the recommendation for, that when we're describing the closure of our landfill, we also describe that each of our members, whatever you decide to do, let's say you decide to do individual solid waste management plans, that we will also describe that our individual members are preparing and submitting their own solid waste management plans, which will supersede the region's plan once it's approved.
So what time frame are we looking at for that submission?
Ours is required to be submitted this calendar year, our update. This is our 5th year, so we have to have it updated this year. I've also been told the DEQ is short-staffed and their permitting and review time is a lot longer than it was a few years ago, which is also, we are also beginning our closure construction plans now, and we're going to submit those closure construction plans to the DEQ within the next 6 to 8 months. Because once we close, we have 12 months to actually start construction on the closure cap. So we want to, and the landfill is different than a transfer station. You have to have your permits all in place before you start construction on a landfill cell or cap or liner. But the transfer station is a little different. The DEQ has a set of guidelines, and as long as your engineer and the public body is following those guidelines, you typically won't have any issues getting a permit. But you have to check all those boxes. And oh, by the way, this also applies to a private company opening up a landfill, a transfer station in your county or your city. They have to follow the same rules.
Like you said, just check the boxes.
Right. And I'll send you the boxes.
Yeah, we've got it. I mean,
Okay.
I don't need it.
Any more questions on solid waste management plan?
Questions? Yes, sir.
Odor complaint report. We've had 4 complaints since our January 29th meeting from 2 addresses.
Questions? Tonnage report.
Finally, the tonnage report, as you'll see, the charts included, and year-to-date totals were quite a bit ahead of last year, but we're falling back in line with the previous few years. So, if the annual tonnages bounce up and down over the course of time, so this is not unusual.
Steve. That is it. Anything else? Or ready to adjourn?
Well, we set a date to continue to now, or will we have a call meeting, I guess, for payroll?
I think you should vote to set the date of the special meeting in May.
Fourth Wednesday is 28th. That appeals to everyone.
May 28th.
I'll make a motion that we have a special call meeting on Wednesday, May the 28th at 2 p.m. Is that good? Okay. To talk about the salary retention study.
Second. Any comments? Let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? May 28th it is. Motion to adjourn. Oh, second that.
Third.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.
Adjourn.